something that I want to talk about tonight too is like what really matters, one, and two, what moves the needle. That's like the second thing that I want to talk about, especially as we think about scaling business. It's like what matters, what moves the needle. And these are the two things actually, like I'm kind of skipping ahead, but when we think about overwhelm, these are the two things that are going to ground us down every single time whenever we're overwhelmed. What really matters, what moves the needle, right? And for me, like definitely leaving Microsoft, because I totally agree. I could stay at Microsoft. I can travel around the world. I'm a huge surfer for anyone on the call that doesn't know that already, but I like literally live to surf and travel to surf. And like I only like all I want to do is be in the water. And so like even when I set my rates when I first started TCP, it was all around how much would it cost to get me out of the water, to do something that I love, because I love this work so much with the corporate psychic. I love the work that I do both in a mentor capacity, in a career coaching capacity, in a life coaching capacity, in a leadership coaching capacity, in a like spiritual and readings capacity. Like I love this. It's so fun. I get so energized from it. It gives me so much life, and it's still like work for me. Whereas like surfing is just like this place that I like when the waves are good, like even with my clients, a lot of times I'll reschedule because it's just such a joy in my life. And it's something that I prioritize so much. And it's through the prioritization of that, by the way, that's allowed me to grow and scale TCP. So we'll talk about that as well. But because of this, I totally could, like, I could be super happy staying in a 9 to 5 capacity, working remotely, making a ton of money because I make really, really good money at Microsoft, and just traveling and surfing a lot, like surfing anytime I'm not on a call, basically, and doing well enough that I can continue to make more money and move up and like live super well. But at the end of the day, what really matters to me actually is the impact that I'm able to make on the world, and um, the impact that I'm able to make on the world, and just like the role that I'm able to play in inspiring people to touch the wisdom of their soul, and being able to facilitate that soul and wisdom connection, that being able to remind people how great they are and draw people back into themselves, and really like guide people into the answers that they already have and know. Like that's the thing that not only sparks me, but that's the thing that matters the most. And so I can do that at Microsoft to an extent, but like where I really can do that is through my business. It's through my people, it's through my movement, it's through my work. And so because of that, there's been this realization of like, okay, I have to leave my job. On top of that, it just even like jumping forward more for me and leaving the 9 to 5, it was two things. At first it was a choice, but I remember when I started my business TCP, the corporate psychic itself it's like a dichotomy, right? Like the word corporate is a very triggering word, especially in the spiritual space. The word psychic is a triggering word in the spiritual space and in the corporate space. It's like these two worlds colliding. And so a huge motivating factor in even naming my business this was bringing this union of opposites together. It was bringing these two very different aspects of myself into one place, but then also like really to encourage and inspire other people to do that as well. Because I fully believe that whenever we're able to embrace all parts of ourselves, that's when we really grow and expand. And it doesn't look like it looks for literally anyone else. And so like the career path is, it's not predefined, right? It's like we know we're on the right path when no one else has done it before. Like when it's truly the unknown, when we're like really moving from the heart. When we move from the heart, we have to integrate all parts of self. And so that's really, really important. And then beyond that, it's like, I don't believe that you have to choose. So a lot of times in the entrepreneurial space, in the spiritual 9 to 5 space, and like the corporate space, and like I'm actually reading this book right now about doing nothing, like the attention economy. So like building personal branding and things like that, and how everybody has to have a personal brand now. Like even in that, when we think about branding ourselves, there's this conflict of, for my business and for the person that I'm making my brand, or for the brand that I'm representing, I have to fit in this box. And we put ourselves in this box, and everything that doesn't fit in that box, we have to like remove. And that sometimes includes the 9 to 5. This happens quite a lot where, this happened to me actually. I did a yoga teacher training and I thought, oh my God, do I quit my job now and teach yoga? Like, what do I do with this? Am I a yoga teacher and can I do this at the same time? Like, how can I be both? And if I really want to dedicate myself to this practice, how can I keep this job, or how can I keep these friends, or how can I keep eating meat, or whatever the thing is, right? Like, and I think we feel that we have to restrict ourselves, and and strip away all of the things that isn't the one thing that we're focused on in that moment, where I believe what we actually need to do is keep all of ourselves and allow the things that are not serving us to fall away. It doesn't have to be a conscious choice, a conscious effort of like, okay, now I'm dedicated to X 100%. So like everything that's not X, I'm just not going to do. Like that's too restrictive. And then on top of that, like it causes all this conflict because there are parts of us that are opposing. And there are parts of us that want X and Y, right? Like there are parts of us that thrive in corporate, but also can teach yoga. There are parts of us that can really do both. And so when I started the Corporate Psychic, it was actually just a fun side project, because I was really like getting super, super deep in the spiritual space. And because I really wanted to just kind of see like what could happen. And I also wanted to change the message of, you have to quit your job if you want to be an entrepreneur. You have to quit your job if you want to be spiritual. You can't be in corporate and be spiritual, when in fact I believe we need more spiritual people in corporate. And like we can radically change the world, especially if we change corporations, right? Like because corporations basically run our world today, quietly or not so quietly. And so like we can kind of like again box ourselves in, or we can allow ourselves to expand and be completely limitless. And then as we expand and become limitless, I think that's when we realize like our true possibilities, and like we're never ever restricted. And so as we come into purpose, as we come into our mission, our work, our movement, as we build our businesses, the realization should be the possibilities are endless, and not we have to be in this box. And so I think anytime we're thinking we have to be in this box, and if we're not in this box, people aren't going to get it. If we're not in this box, people aren't going to buy from us. If we're not in this box, it's not going to work out. Like that's kind of where we have to step back and say, okay, what really matters? Like, who am I? And so we're going to come back to all of this, but my kind of like where I started, why I started saying all of this is because when I started my business, I never had the intention of leaving the 9 to 5. It was literally just a fun side project that I was like, I'm gonna just see what happens if I go all in on something that really matters to me, and be all of the things that I want to be. I'm just gonna see what happens. Like that's what was in my head. Like, what if, what happens? And just allowed myself to be totally open to the possibilities. And at the same time, I did go all in on my business, like investment wise, time wise, energy wise, learnings wise. And then I just kind of allowed things to unfold. And I told myself, because I remember I started like I've been working with coaches for years, but I actually always had resistance to working with coaches, because a lot of coaches always encouraged me to like, one, be a coach, and two, like leave my job. And that didn't ever feel really good to me. And so even as I started deeply working with coaches in this past year on building my business specifically, the same thing came up of like, yeah, of course you're going to leave your job because your business is growing so much. And I remember pushing back on every single coach I worked with and said, look, my goal is not to leave my job. But when the time comes, like I'm not doing this to leave my job, but if there ever comes a time where I have to choose because I'm putting forth so much energy into both, and now my life is taking a hit for it, like my personal life, like if there's ever a time where I can't go surfing because I have like too much TCP or too much work, like then I want to make the decision consciously, do I want to keep my job or do I want to go full time into my business? But until I have to make a choice, I don't want to make a choice, right? Like I want to be able to do both because I get so much joy out of all of these spaces. And I think it's important to kind of like know and talk about and share that. Beyond that, what ended up happening for me is like, one, I did get to a place of, very fortunately, like I'm able to choose between my business and my job, not necessarily just because I was so busy, because I did get very busy, but then also because like financially I was doing really well in my business. And so I was like, oh, I actually like have the freedom to choose like which one do I want to sustain me, or do I want to let both sustain me? How can I sustain myself if I work in these two places? And so for a while I actually entertained like just trying to make as much money as possible, to be completely transparent, through like bringing in money at Microsoft and building this business. And then it did get to a place where my personal life just like exploded. Like in January, my personal life literally just blew up, and it didn't stop blowing up until, I mean, honestly, like even like a week ago, it's like there was still stuff blowing up in my personal life. And so it was almost like the universe kind of pushed me out of my business, or like forced me, or not my business, my job. It kind of forced me into making a choice of like, if you continue to do both, like there's something's got to give, right? Like, and I don't think it means we can't have it all. I do think it means like what really matters to us, and then what moves the needle in our life. And for me, there was this realization of my impact at Microsoft is actually going to be even greater if I leave. And that was a big kind of realization of like, oh wow, I actually have to leave. And then the impact on my personal life if I stay, it's like it's too detrimental. And so at this point, like I can no longer sustain both happily. And I'm now at a place of like, okay, I'm stressed and I'm overwhelmed. Like what matters, what moves the needle. Like, and for me, that was the decision to leave. I don't think that's necessarily the case for everyone. So we'll talk about that. But um whew, I've kind of gone off a little bit on tangent. So I'm going to pause for just a second to see like if there are any other questions to hit, and then we'll kind of dive into just the full story and the biggest learnings that came forth. So let's talk about this actually. I want to kind of give you guys I'm going to try to be very quick, not too quick, but very quick on just my story in general, coming into corporate. Personally and professionally, and then just the beginning, the origins of TCP, and just all of the things that came together over the last really year. Because I think actually it's been, I'm like just short of, I think I'm 23 days away from having my first year anniversary of TCP being like a legitimate LLC and like a real thing in my life. And so, yeah, it's been just about a year. And so let's see. Yeah, I'm going to go way back. So as an undergraduate, I studied philosophy. I actually started college studying chemistry and piano performance. I was a double major. And this is because my parents, neither one of them went to college. So it was like this, like, of course, and my mom is Asian. So it was like, you're going to be a doctor. Like, you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. Like, those are your choices. And so when I went to school, at first, I was very, very like, okay, I'm going to study chemistry and piano performance. I've been playing the piano since a kid. And I met a guy who's this amazing soul. His name is Colin. He actually passed away while I was in college, but we became very close. We worked together, and he died, and he studied philosophy. And I remember, I think I was 19 years old when he died, just like freshly turned 19. And prior to dying, he had traveled. He took a semester off and he drove from North Carolina to California and back. He told me, Marie, if you do anything, like you should take some time off and travel and experience some things. And I was just like, great, but what about school? Because honestly, up until like the age of 26, my entire life was about creating safety and stability and like preparing for my future. That's like what my full focus was always on: safety, stability, focusing on my future, making really good money, finding a really nice person, marrying them, like doing all of the things that I thought I was supposed to do. And that I thought I really wanted, by the way, because I came from a really dysfunctional home. So I really craved that particular, sense of stability and safety and futuristic safety, and also just like wanted to make my parents really proud. And so I remember talking to him, and he was studying philosophy, and he just constantly was blowing my mind with like things that he would say and things that he was doing and concepts. And he just randomly died one day. So he had epilepsy. And I remember it hit me so hard. And at the very same time, I was signing up for like an advanced calculus class for chemistry, and it was full. And so I had to get on the wait list. And in the meantime, I filled my schedule with a philosophy class in honor of Colin. And I ended up falling in love with philosophy. And I was like, whoa, this is totally the thing that I don't know, I'm here to do, right? And philosophy, it means the love of wisdom. And so I think I was probably the only person in my class. There were like 10 of us, by the way. It was a very small class studying philosophy, who really was doing it for the sake of, I'm trying to really understand how to live my life. I really want to know the best way to live. I want to know how to be the best person I can be. What should I focus on? What should I dedicate myself to? And I truly was showing up every day, reading things, not necessarily to argue or to go to law school or to like get a PhD in philosophy, but it was like, really, I wanted to learn, like, how can I be the best person possible? And so throughout that time, I ended up falling into this intersection of neuroscience and ethics, basically like evolutionarily and like from a neurological perspective, why do we behave the way we do? And then is it justified to behave that way? And I got super fascinated in this space because I was like, if we don't believe it's okay to, let's say, cheat on our spouse because we have like an agreement that we're not going to do that, then why do we do that? And then biologically, like, why might we do that? And then if we know why we do this biologically or neurologically, is it justified to behave that way? And then I was really interested in things like when someone gets a brain tumor and they end up like shooting another person, like, is that justifiable? Like, and I kind of went into this rat hole of again, the intersection of neuroscience and ethics, like why do we behave the way we do? And is it justified to behave that way? And how ought we behave? And then how do we course correct, we might say, or how do we hold people accountable? As I was graduating, so when I do things, I tend to go like all in on them and I just let a lot of other things go. And that's what I did when I studied philosophy. I just like stopped showing up to all my other classes. My GPA, horrible, except for philosophy. And as I was graduating, I realized I was really fascinated in neuroscience. And I think, to be completely honest, I wasn't just fascinated with neuroscience, but I knew that that would make more money than philosophy. Like I didn't know what I was going to do with my philosophy degree. And so I thought maybe I'll go back to school for neuro. And at the same time, I started doing a little bit of traveling. So I went to Barbados to lead a surf camp for the company that I worked for. I was a surf instructor, camp counselor, as one of my 4 jobs while I was in college. And I remember going to Barbados and being like, I don't want to leave, but also finding myself in this position of I have $30,000 of student loans that I didn't know I was signing up for when I started college. And I don't really know what to do with that. And I'm not really sure where to go. And so I applied for the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps very swiftly denied me because they were like, you have a degree in philosophy, you have no skills. And at the same time, I got offered a job at an education planning consulting firm. And so I really didn't want to take it. I really wanted to travel. But I knew I needed money, and I knew like at the time the economy was really terrible and I thought I would never get another job. So I accepted the job and ended up being a great thing because the person who owned the company, she was this very, very amazing, smart, wise woman who mentored me. And she actually encouraged me not to go back to school. And she said, figure out what you want to do and then map out a way to get there. And I really thought I wanted to get a degree in neuro. I really didn't want to go back to get an undergrad. So like my plan was to go back to school. I got a master's in computer science. I ended up working at a health technology company. So I shifted, moved to Atlanta, got another job, kind of worked my way up into that job, got engaged, left my left my job and the guy that I was engaged to, got offered a job at Microsoft. That was an 8-month out kind of thing. So then I actually ended up taking a page from Colin's book and I traveled around the country with my dog for a few months living out of my car until I was supposed to start my job at Microsoft. And then I joined Microsoft. And I remember joining Microsoft at the very same time finishing my master's degree, feeling like I knew everything that there was to know about technology, computer science, coding, like all of the things, to be just like very humbled by all the things I didn't know and to be very humbled by the amount of work, time, dedication, effort that people have put into getting the same exact job that I had at the company that I was working for. And so there was this like inner conflict that I felt of knowing that I really wanted to travel and experience my life. And also knowing that I, at this point, had $88,000 in student debt. So like going back and getting my master's just like caked on more debt. And then on top of that, I hadn't been paying it. And so I remember like starting at Microsoft and feeling so proud, but also like not really wanting to fully start. And then getting excited to be able to pay my student loans because I went from making $38,000 a year to $81,500 a year. So it was like a massive salary increase. I think I was 25 or 26 when I started, maybe 25. And actually definitely 25 because it's been about 7 years. And so, yeah, I remember like getting that massive salary increase. I was so excited to start paying my student loans off because I was like, oh, I have all this money now and like I have all this freedom and this is going to be great. And I remember 6 months in, I was just like, I'm miserable. I hate this. Like, I can't do the 9 to 5. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not really good at the work that I'm doing. I have no idea what my job is. Like, I was really struggling and I really, yeah, I wanted to quit, but I had student debt. I had this like dark cloud over me. And I didn't exactly know like what the best thing was, but I knew that quitting my job wasn't going to be the solution. And so I kind of sat with that for a while. And at the very same time, I was dating this guy. We were kind of settling down. He proposed to me. We ended up getting married. And I settled into a very like, I remember that same year. So at the end of my first year at Microsoft, I got my first bonus. It was all together, like my bonus plus my raise, like tipped me over 6 figures. So the first time I hit 6 figures, I was 26. And I remember being like, oh my God. Like, I remember when I was 22, 23, calling my dad and saying, in 5 years from now, I'm going to be making $100,000 a year. And like, he kind of laughed at me because he was like, oh yeah, like that's funny. But I knew like in my heart, I was like, no, I'm going to be right. Like, this is going to happen. I turned 26. A couple months later, I get my first bonus, my first raise, like boom, I'm like tipped over the six-figure kind of marker. At the same time, I'm like settling down with this guy. We're getting married. He also makes really great money. So we buy this like epic house on the water. We have like nice cars, the dog, like everything that like people maybe like dream of and work their life toward. We could say in like today's society, or what we've culturally been conditioned to like really want and work for. And it was all of the things that I had worked my entire life for as well, in seeking that safety and that stability of, I want to set myself up for the future. I want to make sure that I'm taken care of. I want to know that I can take care of myself. I want to marry into a really great family because mine's not so great. Um, yeah, and so around that time, even though I was really miserable in my job, I kind of took this perspective of, how can I take everything I can get out of my job and use all of these resources to make myself the type of person that I want to be? Because we have really great resources internally. And so I started watching all of these internal talks. I learned that what really motivated me and inspired me was watching other people like live their lives genuinely and authentically. I loved hearing people's success stories of like becoming CEO of like an amazing company because they wanted it, right? Because they worked really hard, or somebody who like maybe became like a world renowned author, artist, right? Like I love just listening to people's stories. And that was the thing that like really got me going. But at the same time, like, what do you do with that? Like, I love philosophy. I love hearing people's stories. I love working with people. But again, I was kind of still like, where do I go from here? What do I do with that? Um, and I remember as an undergraduate taking this class called Death, Dying, and the Meaning of Life. At the very beginning of the class, my professor walked in, and I challenge all of you to leave tonight and ask yourself this question. But he said, if you were going to die 1 month from now, what would you do? And I remember every single person in that classroom said something. They said they would do something, like something differently. And most of them radically would have changed their lives in that 1 month period. And at that time in my life, I remember being so happy with my life that I thought I wouldn't change a thing. And I genuinely meant that. Like maybe I would have quit my 4 jobs, but I would have continued going to school. I would have continued studying. I would have continued diving into philosophy and learning, writing. I was writing a ton. And I remember really genuinely thinking like I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't travel. I wouldn't, like there was nothing else that I wanted or needed. I felt so fulfilled. And then fast forward to like being 26, 27, making 100K a year, having this amazing house, amazing husband, great family, all of the boxes are checked. And we're driving down the road one day, and I asked him this question of, if you were going to die in a month from now, what would you do? And I forget his answer. I don't know that I remember how he answered it, but I do remember that I had this realization of, I don't want any of this. I wouldn't be in this job. I wouldn't be in this marriage. I don't want this house. I don't want these cars. I don't want to live here. Like everything about my life, I would abandon. I see myself traveling, or kind of like leaving the situation alone, like not even with you, right? I had this realization of like, whoa. And this moment of my whole entire life has somehow gotten out of alignment. And I have no idea how that happened in like a 4 year time span or less, of I'm so happy that I wouldn't change a thing, to like now I still outwardly feel really happy, but I would change every single thing, right? I would change every single aspect. And so from that moment on, I kind of just started letting my life completely unravel. And I let go of everything except for my job, by the way, because my job paid me really well. And at that point, I had settled into like a really nice rhythm where I understood what my work was. I started working my way up. I started feeling really good and confident in my work. I think a lot of my unhappiness in the beginning was just not being confident in what I could do, not really knowing how I can contribute, not really knowing what my impact was, not understanding what motivated me, what my purpose was, and things like that. And so there was this profound shift that happened in my workplace, in my 9 to 5, when I realized how I could fulfill my purpose through my actual 9 to 5. So that changed a lot for me. And then I also, as I started unraveling my life, I very slowly just started, rather than saying I want X, I'm going to let go of everything that's not X. I actually just started asking myself, what do I want? And so the way that I like to think about this is, someone once told me, we're talking about dieting and like shifting over to vegan and vegetarianism. And a friend, guide, mentor of mine, she said this really beautiful thing of, let's not think about the things you can't have, but instead focus on what you can have. And so rather than being like, I'm not going to eat meat, just add like more greens to your plate and just eat that first, right? Like just start by adding more of what you want, and just like the things that aren't serving you are going to naturally fall off of your plate. Like that's just what's going to happen slowly over time if you just focus on the things that you need, right? And I think the same thing is true of life, and that's exactly what happened for me is I just started doing the things that I wanted to do. And then that kind of snowballed into doing more things that I wanted to do and honoring myself more and more and more and more. And then that shifted to like eventually my marriage dissolved, and eventually like I sold the house and I moved and I started as we talked about at the beginning of the call, really living my life the way I wanted to. So working at Microsoft, so keeping my 9 to 5, but like traveling all the time to surf, surfing all the time when I want to. Like, so even with my 9 to 5 for the past 3 years, every single morning I've woken up with the sunrise that I've been home. Let's not say every single morning I've woken up with the sunrise. Most mornings I wake up with the sunrise and I surf before work. It's just like a non-negotiable. When the surf gets really good, I'm not necessarily working now, but when I was in my 9 to 5, I would email my team and say, the surf is really good. I'm going to be offline for 2 or 3 hours, or we have really great swell. I'm going to be surfing all day. So I'll talk to you all tomorrow. If there's an emergency, reach out to someone else. And so what ended up happening is, without trying to establish really strong boundaries, I just did because I was so focused on what I wanted and it became so important to me and so coveted to me. And I did the same thing of like, let's just see what happens if I just take an afternoon off? Is anyone going to die? And so over time, I started creating more and more and more space for the things that really brought me joy, and then allowed myself to contain and have boundaries around the things that brought me joy, so that the stuff that I had to do, I could do, but I didn't have to like overwhelm or overrun myself to do it. Like work just became a means for a paycheck. It became like a means for me to express myself in a different way, but also a place where I could really put my foot down and say, like, actually, the waves are really good, and realize that no one was going to freak out or persecute me, or it wasn't going to like change my job or the world, and people weren't going to die, right? Like it was this slow kind of subtle shift of, again, putting more of what I wanted on my plate, more of what I wanted on my plate, and just allowing the things that weren't serving me to kind of slowly fall off. And so through this process, by the way, I like moved my way up through Microsoft. So like now I'm leaving, but my job as a business manager, I've managed like multiple businesses internally. So managing like multi-million-dollar budgets, working with our executives. So I work with like one of our top leadership teams, we could say, within the company, and really like owning a lot of things like operations and keeping the business running and keeping our leaders happy, and working really closely with our execs and our leaders and people who are just like insanely successful and make like insane money, and learning that those are just people too, and that even in working in such high stakes, I can be like, hey, actually the waves are really good and everyone's going to be cool with that. So I was like really through kind of like moving my way up and into this place, and cultivating safety inside myself so that I could trust myself to do the things I wanted, is where TCP came in, by the way. So again, I had no intention. I started Microsoft, I hated it. I wanted to leave. I like grew into it, really learned where I fit, really like grew into myself. Decided that I didn't want to leave, by the way. I was like, oh, I think I'm going to stick around for a while because I understand now how my work funds my life and my lifestyle, and my life and my lifestyle is more important than the work I do. And it was through adding or creating all of this space in my life where TCP just dropped into my being, because I've known for years, since I was probably 16, 17, 18, that I wanted to start my own business, that I wanted to work for myself. I just had no idea what the heck I wanted to do. Like I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had no idea what I could bring to the world. I had no idea what that would look like. Even studying philosophy, I knew it was important, but I was like, how will I apply this? And so, and for years, I mentioned this earlier, but I think 3 years into Microsoft, 2 years into Microsoft while I was married, I very seriously talked about quitting. I talked to my husband because he made really great money. And I was just like, how can I leave my job and like just go write for a year? Because I've always written. And I was like, I want to just quit and like write for 1 year. And then if nothing comes of that, I'll go back, or I'll get another job. And we talked about even me going back and getting my PhD, which, by the way, that was like, the PhD thing was a total distraction from like what I really wanted to do, which was writing, right? And like by writing, I mean like expressing and sharing my philosophy and helping people, again, like experience and touch the wisdom of their soul. Like that's truly what I feel I'm like drawn and called to do. And so I planned on quitting then. I didn't quit. I ended up leaving my marriage instead, which ultimately was good. And then a couple years later, same thing. Once I finally fully got out of my marriage, I thought I'm just going to quit my job and take like my bonus and just like put my student loans on hold and I'm going to go travel for a while. And I was super close to doing that. And what's really funny is instead I bought a house. I took the money that I had saved and I bought a house. And best decision that I made at the time. And it seemed to make no sense because I kind of like flip flopped, but this was almost an example of I just followed my intuition. I bought this house. I remember calling my best friend a week before the due diligence was due and just being like, am I ruining my life by buying this house? Like, am I tying myself down to this location? Am I stuck in my job forever now? Will I not pay my student loans off because I bought this house? I had like all of these anxieties, but then what ended up happening was I bought this house. I lived in it for a year. I met a different person. I moved in with them. I rented my house out. And then my house gave me all of this additional income so that I could buy this house that I live in now, which is like my dream house. It's on the beach. And have both and like actually like receive rental income, which helped me, by the way, in making my decision to leave Microsoft because I'm like, oh, I have this additional income, which I have since sold my house. So there are like a lot of things that kind of came together for me, which we'll come back to. But again, essentially it was like creating all of this space for myself to like hear what my intuition was telling me to do and then to allow myself to trust it. And then on top of that, creating the space for myself so that when the corporate psychic dropped into my being, it was literally an idea that just like it fell into my being. I was coming off of the beach one day surfing and it came forward and I was like, oh, interesting. And at the time I was really this is a little over a year ago now, but I was really exploring spirituality in a new way. So I'd been teaching and practicing yoga for like, I don't know, 14 or 15 years at this point. And have always kind of been in the spiritual space, but a little bit resistant to going all in and super deep. And actually what happened is I had an astrology reading with this amazing human being, Meredith from Earthling Astrology. Highly recommend if anyone's looking for an astrologer. Who, you know, she essentially was like, Marie, you have psychic medium all over your chart. What are you doing with this? Do you have a deck? What are, you know, like, how are you expressing this? And I was just like, oh, well, actually, like I've, you know, my best friend's mom has been reading cards since we were kids, but I have been waiting for someone to give me a deck. And I didn't think that this was something I could do unless I was like invited, right? And she was like, oh my God, consider this your invitation, consider this your gift, go buy yourself a deck, right? And so like it has literally been maybe like 15 months since I started actually like reading and practicing tarot deeply for myself and for other people. So like TCP is like founded basically on this like very soft beginning of like, oh, I'm going to start exploring tarot. And I started exploring tarot and I got super deep, very quickly shifted into the Akashic records. So I started reading them for myself. I started kind of reading them for other people. I started working with Rita as like a spiritual coach and mentor. And I haven't stopped working with her. Actually, she's just absolutely amazing. But things just started kind of like falling into place because I allowed them to, but not even because I allowed them to, I just had so much space for them to. So I actually want to like back up a little bit. As I shifted in my 9 to 5 from being super focused on my job and moving up to being focused on myself and doing what I loved, AKA like a lot of surfing, a lot of time by myself, a lot of reading, a lot of writing, and enforcing hard boundaries at work, something else happened. So those hard boundaries that came into my job actually shifted into my personal life as well, where I said no to everything for almost an entire year. Like every single plan that someone wanted me to do, every like party, every event, every just like friend calling me and being like, hey, do you want to hang out in 2 weeks? I stopped making plans completely, mostly because I'm such a crazy surf person that like I know the waves could be good at any time. And so like I didn't want to flake out on people because my friends would get really angry at me. But because I just stopped saying yes to almost everything that I knew I didn't want to do, like the things that I didn't want to do stopped showing up in my life. So like by creating space, I mean, I had a lot of time and space where my life was literally just kind of like work and then whatever I enjoyed. And sometimes that was spending time with friends and that was doing things, but most of it was like completely unplanned, open time. And I think this is really, really important because, again, I think it's that unplanned, open time, that nothingness that allowed my business to come through and allowed me to like really hear and follow my intuition and then like run with it. And essentially that's what happened. So like TCP dropped into my being. I kind of like worked a little bit on how do I make this real. I started working with Rita initially in the capacity of, can you help me start my business? Because I know you're doing a business really similar and I have no idea what I'm doing. We ended up working completely in the space of energy instead of anything tangible. And then I started really just like outsourcing and bootstrapping as much as I can. And by that, I mean, like I was making decent money at Microsoft and my bills were being paid. So I basically took like all of my extra money. I don't want to say all of my extra money. I allowed myself a budget because I said TCP is going to be this fun side project. Let's see what happens. So I gave myself a small budget of like, okay, what if I hire someone else to build my website instead of build it myself? And I did that because I knew if I built my own website, I'm too much of a perfectionist, and I'm stepping out of tech into like the spiritual woo woo space, which is like the opposite of how people know me. Like even my surfer friends were like, what the hell, you're reading tarot cards now? Like what's going on, right? Like everyone was so thrown off. And I knew that if I did everything myself, I would never put it into the world in a way that felt good to me, and that I would just constantly be like hiding and holding it closely and like too scared to share. So I was like, all right, I need help with a website and I need help with a brand, because those are two things that I know I can do. I'm totally capable of building websites, you guys. But I knew that if I did them, I wouldn't put it out there. So I was like, these are the things I'm going to invest in. And then I had no idea what I was doing business wise. So I was like, I'm going to invest in a business coach, which again, we ended up working on energy instead. And that was exactly what I needed. It's just like being able to work in the energy of my business itself, really learning how to tap into the energy of my business and working with my business and tap into my own energy and working with that. I think catalyzed just a ton of quantum leaps like in the first few months. And then on top of that, I just asked myself, like, what's really important? And like, if this is a fun side project and the stakes are low and I don't really care about leaving my job, what do I need to do to like make this real? Right. And so essentially I started offering like a ton of free readings because I was like, well, I need practice. I need to deepen in my own work. And I want to build awareness. And so I offered free readings for like 3 or 4 months, you guys. So like from June to actually October, I did like over 100 free readings. Yeah, I did over 100 free readings, like constantly. Like if I wasn't working at Microsoft, if I wasn't surfing, I was like reading for someone or talking about what I was doing and sharing the work that I was doing so that I could really like build awareness, we might say. But then also like, again, I was experimenting with my own comfort of like how do I share this with people? How, like, is this a new kind of identity? What does that look like? If this is a fun side project, how can I fully be myself and share this thing that I do? And so the first 4 months was just like straight up experimenting. Like, what kind of readings do I enjoy? How long would I like to do this? What price would I even like to charge? How does everything feel? And then there came a point in time where it was like, okay, like now it's time to charge for the work that I'm doing, right? Like things kind of, and I knew that I was going to do that, by the way. So like as I was building my website, I already had my entire like offerings and price list, but I was just kind of sitting on them. And like allowing myself to move through, experiment and adjust them so that once I went like fully live, and by that it was a very soft thing, like I was giving readings already, so it was really more just like I'm completely booked in full. So if you want to book with me now, like this is what that looks like. So in October, I started offering paid readings. And then because I was doing a lot of work on finding purpose, and I still do this, by the way, this is like one of my favorite things ever, the Find Your Purpose session. I offer this. Actually, Katie, I think you've done this with me, so she could totally vouch for this. But it's like one of my favorite sessions where it's a really concentrated, like deep dig into the Akashic records, also dig into like yourself and your purpose and understanding like why you're here and what it is that you're here to do. And that was such a passion area of mine where I was like, wow, if I can help people find their soul purpose, I can unlock so, because for me, that unlocked so much. And that's what unlocked my feeling of unlimited possibilities, where I was like, oh my God, I totally fulfill my purpose in my 9 to 5, which allowed me to like really be happy in my 9 to 5 before I started my business, which again allowed me to create this spaciousness to even start my business. And so as I was starting to do a lot more sessions like that, I kind of asked myself, how can I do this at scale? Because it's a little bit hard for me now that I have a full-time job for me to like just be kind of working with people. And at the time it was like a 2 session thing over a few weeks. That's like changed a lot. But my solution was maybe I'll do this in a group setting. So like maybe I'll just run a group kind of program or course. And this is funny, you guys, because I definitely never saw myself doing spiritual readings and work, I don't know, 5 years ago, but I would have like completely laughed if somebody told me 5 years ago, even a year and a half ago, that I would be like coaching, even though I totally have been doing this for a living at Microsoft for a long time. Like it's always been a big part of my job, is mentoring others and guiding others and even managing and working with others to like bring them to their potential. But it's funny because I was like so averse. I was like, I don't want to be a coach because I worked with coaches for so long and they're like, be a coach, like start a coaching business, right? And I was like, I don't want to do that. That's not my thing. But then I was like, let's do this group program for soul purpose. And I like shifted like so totally unconsciously, subconsciously into like this coaching world. And it was amazing. Like I led my first group container. I think 10 people signed up. And I continued to do readings and it just like honestly, everything kind of grew from there. And so in November, I did, a 7-week kind of group coaching, facilitated guided session into soul purpose. Opened up my calendar for bookings, started working with another coach who I actually ended up closing my calendar completely for bookings and leaning more into the coaching space because I was working on at this point, like juggling so many things at once. I shifted my focus from trying to do everything to trying to do like, okay, what's the highest revenue generating, least energy sucking thing that I can do that's going to bring money into my business, that's going to feel sustainable and feel really good for me. And that was actually working in groups and working with people one-on-one and working more long term. And so I was like, okay, let's shift to that and let's see how that feels. And so I experimented with that for a while. And then my personal life blew up. Like I said, like my dog died, my mom went into the hospital, my partner's dad went into the hospital, he died, my partner and I split up. Like literally, like anything and everything that you could think that's just like, how do you manage just that in 1 year happened to me in like the last 3 months. But at the same time, my business started really expanding and growing and exploding. And I started like having people reaching out and like really wanting to do work that I wasn't even advertising or talking about or sharing. I think just, just from like being and doing in the work itself. And so it was like this amazing kind of explosion that happened while like my personal life was crumbling. And then also like explosion that kind of came intentionally for me, again, shifting my focus to like, what does my heart really want? And how can I work through that? How can I show up in that way? How can I show up in that way, inclusive of all parts of myself? And then how can I continue to grow and expand and allow that expansion to continue naturally? And so again, I didn't even realize that this was going to be so much of a theme tonight, but really allowing the things that I want to come into my life while just like, again, allowing the things that are not working to just fall away. And I think that this is really hard because when we're juggling the 9 to 5 and a business itself, we're juggling separate identities. And so there's an integration that needs to happen as well with like who even we are in both places. An integration that needs to happen, by the way, at your job too. Like I think there's such an opportunity like in your 9 to 5 itself. Like this is something that so greatly expanded me into my business. It was just showing up authentically at work. And by authentically, I mean like fully integrating myself and showing up authentically at work so that when I actually started my business, no one was shocked by it. I think people were kind of like, whoa, we had no idea that you like read tarot cards and did Akashic Records reading. And like, what are Akashic Records readings? Like, I think from that perspective, people were like, that's kind of strange. But at the same time, like, I was just so much myself that it flowed very naturally and easily. And again, it was one of those things where things that weren't serving me just left and things that were serving me just continued to expand. And so there's an integration that needs to happen between like 9 to 5 in your business. And it's the same integration that needs to happen in self, right? Like, how can you, and like in juggling and managing the 9 to 5, it's like, how can you take all of the learnings from your work and also put those into your business? And by that, I mean, how can you be aware of the way that you work, the person that you are at work, the way that you think about your job, the way that you're thinking about yourself while you're at your job, and realize that all of those things subconsciously are applying to your business too, or subconsciously are applying to your side projects or the things that you want to do too. And by that, I mean, if you're in a job that you know you hate, like notice, what is your work ethic like? Notice, how do you think about your job when you're actually doing your job? How present are you in the moment when you're at work? How do you distract yourself when you're at work? When do you feel complacent? Are you able to be your full self? And then realize that no matter how conscious and intentional you are in your business, these habits in your job are going to translate over. And so this is like, I didn't really realize we were going to go here either, but this is a really important thing to think about as we're thinking about leaving our job. And this is another really great, just like expansive learning that can come by keeping our jobs for a little while longer, is like really asking ourselves, how can I show up fully in my job? How can I really become aware of of my downfalls, of the things that are maybe not serving me at work so that I don't repeat them in my business? Because the way that we do one thing a lot of times is the way that we do all things. And so how we react in a work scenario is going to be really similar to how we react in a business scenario. And this is, I think, really important. Um, I'm kind of like going off track now, so I'm going to pause for a second to then like just see if you guys have any questions, see what's coming up for you, and then we'll kind of go into the learnings. And maybe I'll be a little bit more organized in my thought process, maybe not, maybe we'll keep flowing. But I'm gonna pause. Like, how are you all feeling? What's like landing, what's not landing? Where do you have questions? I'm gonna attempt to be somewhat organized and not ramble too much when it comes to some of the learnings, which I've already talked really deeply to some extent about, just again allowing the expansiveness to come and like allowing the things that aren't serving us to fall away. I think that's a huge learning. Another thing that I would say, and this is the same exact thing but said slightly differently, like the biggest learning that I've had in managing a business and my 9 to 5, and like not just managing but scaling and growing my business to a capacity of, okay, now I can leave my 9 to 5, because I know the way that I told the story very much feels like, oh, things just exploded, and that's not exactly what happened either, right? Like I think like I laid a lot of groundwork for a full solid 8 months before like things really started take like momentum started really building, right? But the biggest learning that I would share in that would be, allow yourself to just do. Because I think a lot of times, especially whenever we want to, because for years, like I have to say, for years, I knew I wanted to start my own business. I didn't know what kind of business I wanted to start. And that just stopped me from actually starting anything, because I didn't allow myself to try anything, because I thought if I'm not passionate about it, I don't want to do it. And if I'm not passionate about it, it's not going to be successful. And if I don't have deep knowledge there, it's not going to work out. And like all of the, I just didn't know, like, what do I want to dedicate my life, my time, and my space to enough that I want to actually start a business? And the answer was like nothing. I couldn't think of anything. But then what happened with TCP is, like, by one, taking the pressure off to being like, I'm starting this business to leave my job, or I'm starting this business because it's my life passion or it's my purpose, right? Like that's a lot of pressure. I just told myself, like, I'm really into this thing, and people pay money for this thing that I'm really into. So like, what if I just started charging people money? And like, what if I just treated this like an experiment? And in this experiment fun side project, what if I went all in on it just to see what happens? And I truly allowed that. And so with that, like, it took so much, and this is why the 9 to 5 is so great, because when you're not fully reliant on your business to pay your bills, you have full creative freedom to do whatever you want to experiment however you want to look completely like a fool, to like fail or not fail, because you're not relying on it to pay your bills. And so like the pressure is just like so much less. And so this is why I would say, like, if you're thinking about quitting your 9 to 5, or you're not really sure if you should go all in on your business or not, I would say, how can you go all in on your business while you keep your 9 to 5? And by that, how can you just do anything? So if you're like listening to this and you're like, I don't even know what type of business I want to have, like, how can you allow yourself to experiment and just be like, oh, well, I really like sewing sunglass holders. How can you allow yourself to just be like, well, sunglass cases, sorry you guys, I'm like, what's the word for that? Like, how can you allow yourself to just like make 5 of them and like put them on Etsy, and or like tell your friends that you're making them and selling them and asking them, hey, do you want to buy this thing for $7, without even making it like a business or a thing, right? Like without even being like, I'm going to make a brand and a website and like do all of these things, and now my life revolves around sunglass holders or cases, right? Like, how can you just let yourself experiment and be like, does this feel good? Can I do this? How can I do this? What could I shift and change? Does this even sustain me? How could this sustain me? Like, allowing yourself to experiment, and then being like, oh, maybe sunglass holders aren't it, but like cases. But like, I really like sewing hats, and like maybe that is the thing, or whatever the thing is, right? Like allowing yourself to grow and shift without like being too rigid in one thing. And so I would say, like, don't wait for that perfect idea. Don't wait for the perfect business. Don't wait for the thing that you know is going to make you $1 million. But instead, when you get the urge to do something that can be monetized, or if you're not sure, because everything can be in some way if you want to monetize it, right? Like when you get the urge to do it, how can you just let yourself do it and put it out there? How can you just try it? And then even as you build your business, so I would say if you have an established business, because now I'd say TCP is a pretty established business, how can you keep that playfulness and that experimentation alive Because this is like you trusting your intuition, by the way. How can you allow your offerings to shift and change? How can you like let yourself move and expand through action, not through just thought, not through like defining what you are, what you're going to be doing, or what your mission is, or what your purpose is? How can you embody it? How can you like experiment and embody it? And I would say like that's been the biggest learning, and hands down the thing that's led me to like only more and more and more success over the last year has been completely allowing myself to be completely fluid in the work and not super rigid, and even defining like who and what I am. And by that I would say like learn by doing. Just allow yourself to learn by doing. And there's actually like this book. So I'm reading this book, How to Do Nothing. I think I referenced it already once, but there's this really beautiful quote talking about just writing this book in general. And it says, well, actually, I'll read the whole paragraph for you guys so you have better context. But it says, when you collect marine animals, there are certain flatworms. This is completely out of context, total different subject, but bear with me, that are so delicate that they're almost impossible to capture whole, for they break and tatter under the touch. So these worms, you can't just like catch them and touch them. So instead, you have to let them ooze and crawl of their own will to the knife blade, and then you lift them gently into your bottle of seawater. And this is how you collect these marine animals. You let them come to you. And so the quote says, and perhaps that might be the way to write this book, to open the page and let the stories crawl in by themselves. And I would say that's like the biggest learning that I would love to pass on to you guys, is like, how can you just open the page and let the words come onto the page themselves? How can you open yourself and let yourself move and learn by doing, and experiment without pressure, without judgment, without like this grand scheme or plan, without knowing all the answers? How can you just let yourself move? Because that's going to be the thing that starts to like key you in on what moves the needle. And that's going to be the thing that keys you in on like what work you should be doing and how much you should be charging and like what that looks like. And again, the thing that moves the needle for your business. So I would say like, if you're somebody listening, or if you're somebody even like feeling stuck in your business, or somebody listening that's like, I don't know where to start, like, I would say just start anywhere. Like, what's the thing that you think you want to do and try? How can you let yourself do it and try it? How can you just let yourself put yourself out there without knowing all the answers and even having to share all the answers? Like, you don't have to define yourself. You don't have to define your business. You don't have to have everything like written out or on a website or available to like be doing the thing. So how can you embody the thing that you want and just let yourself try it and see how it fits? And then allow the snowball to happen, because it totally will. Like if you do, things will come. The second big thing that I really want to talk about in going from side hustle to full-time business is like a big question I get. So number one question is like, where do I start? Number two question is like, what do I invest in? A lot of people get really, because for me, I built my business very intentionally through scaling outward with other people and other things, because I had a job and I had limited time and I wanted to serve. And so that meant I wasn't going to build my own website. It meant I wasn't going to even do all of my social media. It meant I wasn't going to do all of my marketing. It meant that like I had to be really intentional about the things I actually wanted to invest my time and energy on, which truly meant how can I be in my work as much as possible, the stuff that I'm like selling and charging money for, versus all of the other things that even maybe bring in the work, right? Which this is really hard, because I think as a new entrepreneur, we feel that we have to do everything. And then by doing everything, then like when things grow, we allow ourselves to hire, we allow ourselves support, we allow ourselves help. And I would say, actually, what support do you need to just start? Number one question. If you're not sure where to start, learn by doing. If you can't do, if you don't feel like you're capable of doing yet, if you feel really stuck, I would ask, what support do you need to just start, to just move the needle? And then from there, I would say, what support do you need so that you can be in the work that you're selling or that you're doing or that you're giving? If that's like you're selling sunglass cases that you've sewed by hand, what support do you need so that you can sew all the sunglass cases that you want to, so that you can sell them? Does that mean you need someone else to build your site? Does that mean you need someone else to sell your cases for you? Does that mean you need someone to upload them onto the website? Like, what support do you need so that you can be in the work that you want to be doing that makes you feel really good? That's where you want to invest your time. And that's where you want to like learn, not your time. That's where you want to invest your money. That's where you want to outsource as much as possible. This is like very, non-traditional, maybe, let's say, especially for someone like, let's say, starting a coaching business or a spiritual business, oftentimes we feel, again, that we have to do everything. And it feels very scary to like hire help before we have like a lot of money coming in, right? But what I've learned is like, one, only we know the support that we need. And so sometimes that does mean a coach. Like sometimes that means hiring a business coach. That's what I did. Sometimes it means like outsourcing a job, outsourcing administrative help, outsourcing the things that we need so that we can buy back our time. And I think the beautiful thing about having a 9 to 5, again, is like we're not worried about paying our bills. And so invest your money in the thing that's going to allow you to be in your work. And if that means it's a coach, invest in a freaking coach. If that means it's someone to build your website, do that. If that means you need admin help, if that means you need sales help, whatever that is, like allow yourself that support so that, again, you can be in the work, so that you can ease yourself out of the overwhelm and scale the work that you're doing faster. That's been like a huge, huge, huge learning for me. And from the beginning, when I went all in on my business, I went all in terms of I got help very fast. I didn't want to do it all by myself. I knew that I couldn't do it all by myself. I had a full-time job. And so give yourself grace and say, you know what? I don't even want to do all of this, and I don't have the time to do all of this. And then I would say, with that, if you're like, I have a full-time job and it just pays my bills and I don't have any time or money to invest in my business, I would say, time-wise, focus on the highest generating revenue thing that you can do, that also is the least amount of effort. I say this all the time, but I truly mean this. Like, oftentimes, especially if you're a spiritual entrepreneur or a coach, we start with like the thing that makes the least amount of money. Like, we'll start like with their community. We're like, let's build our community, or let's build our lowest price offer, or let's build the thing that's like gonna not sustain us at all. And then we pour all of our time and energy into that. I would say, what's the most expensive thing that you can offer services for or like get money for? Focus on that first, because the moment you feel yourself sustained, like the more you can move and grow and scale, and the more confident you're going to feel, and the happier and the easier it's going to be, and like the more it's going to flow. And then from there, I would say, whatever money you make, especially if you have a 9 to 5, whatever money you make in your business for the first few months or for a certain amount of time, maybe set like something on your calendar, every penny that you make, put it back into your business. That's like one of the biggest, best advice that I can give to you guys. Like, this is what I did for my first 6 to 8 months. And like at the end of my 6 to 8 months, I didn't have to do that anymore. And I could like hire people and pay myself. But for my first 6 to 8 months, I didn't actually give myself any money, even though I was making money. Like, I didn't take any of that out of my business account. I literally just threw it right back into my business. I threw it right back into like investment for coaching. I threw it right back into software for what I needed. I threw it right back into like hiring as administrative help so that I could be more in the work, so that I could give more readings, so that I had more time, right? And like, that's the thing behind the scenes that built the momentum I needed to actually scale. And I think this is something we don't talk about quite a lot, but it's really, really important, because again, oftentimes when we think about growing business or scaling, we think about just like selling and we think about like these people who make like millions of dollars and have really small teams. But the thing is, like, and we think about people who invest in coaching. I say this because like working in the coaching space, we're always talking about, I have this coach and I'm investing in this coach and I'm doing all this stuff with this other person. I'm spending all this money on this person who's like supposed to be helping me, and probably they are helping you. I like to think that I help all of my clients quite a lot, but I realize I'm not the one doing the work for them. My clients are doing their own work, right? And the same thing is true of when I work with a coach. I'm the one doing the work at the end of the day. And so you have to ask yourself, what support do you really need? And where should you really be investing your time and money that your business is making? And I can tell you, if you're throwing it back into your business as opposed to necessarily just yourself or maybe another coach or another person, your business is going to grow. So that's like a huge learning that I would like love to just like plant in the mind of each of you guys. And then the third thing that I want to talk about kind of comes back to, Kim, what you said at the beginning of like overwhelm and distracting ourselves. And that's just like, as you get started in the things that you love and that you want to work on. So like, let's say this is your business, since we are talking side hustle to full-time business, there comes a time where we have to really lean into what motivates us to continue to build that momentum. And it's really easy to start like especially once we start making money too, or even just before we start making money when we start a business, it's really easy to go into the overwhelm. So whether you have a 9 to 5 or whether you're have no 9 to 5 and you're working 100% on your business, the overwhelm gets real because we think about all the things we need to do in our personal life. And so I have a client actually who she's very overwhelmed because she has to check off all the boxes on her personal obligations, like let's say cleaning the house, doing all of her chores before she feels like she can allot any time on her business. So that's like one form of overwhelm. There's this other form of overwhelm where we have just all of this shit in our personal lives that we have to take care of. So then we just don't have a lot of time and energy to put into our business. Like Kimberly, you're talking about getting married and like going on a honeymoon and like starting a new job. Like that's a lot of transitions at once. To focus on your business at the same time can be really difficult, right? Or to focus even on yourself at the same time can be difficult. I think when you just have a 9 to 5 that's really demanding, that can oftentimes be really overwhelming to manage with our business as well. And then on top of that, like let's say you have none of that going on, it's still so easy to get overwhelmed. And this is something that I'm finding myself falling into the cycle of I'm leaving my job and now I have all this time for my business. And remember at the very beginning, I said that it was the spaciousness and time and the nothingness that allowed my business to even come through. And it was working in the energy of the spaciousness and time and nothingness, by the way, that ultimately allowed my business to grow and expand. And so what's fascinating is now that I'm back in the space of I have all of this time, or will be having all of this time to focus on my business. What's fascinating is I immediately want to, like, my natural tendency is I want to just fill the time with whatever I can. And like I find myself getting overwhelmed of, oh my God, I have this massive list of things that I need to do for TCP. And by that I mean like I should be posting on Instagram every day. What's like going on in my stories? Am I like I'm not on TikTok yet. Should I be on TikTok? Like should I be on Twitter? Like it's like this whole social media like overwhelm for one. Two, I'm like, oh my God, I like it's June 6th. I haven't sent my newsletter out this month. This is like such a great example. I'm like, I gotta send my newsletter out. I gotta record a podcast for this week. I got to record a podcast for next week because I'm about to start traveling really heavily. And like then all of a sudden there's this long list of things that I need to do or that I think I need to do that can then become very overwhelming. And it's like suddenly you have all this time. And so the tendency again is to just start filling that time. And so like the third and biggest learning that I would love to pass on to you guys is how can you move away from filling your time with anything that doesn't matter or doesn't serve you? And by that, I mean, what moves the needle of your life, of your business, of what you really care about? Like what matters and what moves the needle to that? And by that, I mean, for me, is making a post on Instagram moving the needle in my business? No. Is sending my newsletter out on the first day of every month the thing that moves the needle in my business? No. Is it the thing that like maybe might land a client? Yes. But if I send it 5 days later, like, is it that, like what's the thing that's really moving the needle? And how can you focus just on that? How can you ground down just on that? And instead of like creating this long list of stuff that you have to do, especially when you're juggling a 9 to 5, because when you're juggling a 9 to 5, your time is freaking limited. So ask yourself, if I do X, like, is that moving the needle of my business? And if the answer is no, how can you just let it go and focus on what does? Because the more you focus on what does, you're again going to be developing that intuitive sense more and more. You're going to listen to it more and more. And it's not always going to make logical sense, but the more you can lean into that, the more you can allow everything else to fall off of your plate, the more that will expand and grow. And like your success will expand and grow. And again, the thing, maybe your 9 to 5 is a thing that ends up over time just falls off of your plate because it can, because you allow it to, right? Instead of because you're planning for it to, or because you have this big list of things to do. Yeah, so those are like kind of like the three massive things. Let me double check to see if there's anything else that I want to talk about. And then we can go like even deeper into, I think, overwhelm and distraction, because I think that that's a really big one. But I do want to pause again just to see like, how is this landing for you all? What questions do you have? Are there questions around like where to invest your time and money? Are there questions around dealing with overwhelm or coming back to what matters, or even just getting started? Like what comes up for each of you?